Have you ever paused to ask yourself a deceptively simple question? Why do we consume what we do not like? Why do we click on videos that irritate us, read posts that anger us, or engage with content that leaves us emotionally depleted rather than enriched? There is something deeply paradoxical in this behavior, an almost compulsive attraction towards that which disturbs us. Thumbnails engineered to provoke outrage, headlines designed to offend, and narratives crafted to polarize. These do not repel us, they draw us in. This phenomena may be described as the paradox of aversive engagement, the tendency of individuals to engage intensely with content that generates negative emotional states such as anger, indignation, or disgust. It's not merely accidental, it is patterned, predictable, and increasingly engineered. In the digital age, where attention is currency and visibility is power, this paradox has been transformed into a systemic logic. What was once a psychological quirk has now become the foundation of vast communicative economy, one that thrives not on harmony or understanding, but on provocation. It is in this context that the term rage bait gained prominence, being recognized as the Oxford Word of the Year for 2025. This selection reflects not just linguistic popularity, but cultural significance. Oxford's choice signals an acknowledgement that contemporary digital discourse is increasingly structured around content designed to provoke anger for the sake of engagement. It may be defined as the content deliberately crafted to elicit outrage, indignation, or moral anger in order to maximize user engagement, visibility, and algorithmic amplification. Oxford's recognition of the term underscores a broader transformation, the shift from information driven communication to affect driven communication. In other words, it is no longer the informational value of content that determines its circulation, but its emotional intensity, particularly its capacity to provoke. Rage bait is not an isolated phenomenon. It is a culmination of a long historical trajectory. In the pre-digital era, emotional provocation was already embedded in media practices. Yellow journalism in the late 19th century relied heavily on sensationalism to capture public attention. Propaganda regimes of 20th century mobilized outrage to consolidate political power. Tabloid culture commodified scandal and moral panic. The early internet introduced clickbait, which exploited curiosity rather than anger. Headlines were designed to create informational gaps. You won't believe that what happens next, thus appealing to your cognitive intrigue. However, as digital platforms evolved, a critical shift occurred from curiosity driven engagement to outrage driven engagement. This transition marks the emergence of rage bait as a dominant communicative strategy. In contemporary algorithmic ecosystem, emotional extremity, particularly anger, has proven to be far more effective in generating interaction than curiosity alone. The effectiveness of rage bait rests on a complex interplay of psychological, sociological, moral, and technological mechanism. Let's talk about it one by one. Human cognition is inherently biased towards negative stimuli, a phenomena known as negativity bias. Negative information is processed more rapidly, remembered more vividly, and responded to intensely than positive information. Works in moral psychology, particularly by Jonathan Haidt, demonstrates that moral emotions such as anger and disgust are intuitive and immediate, often preceding rational deliberation. Rage bait exploits this predisposition by presenting content that triggers moral outrage, thereby bypassing reflective reasoning. From a sociological perspective, outrage is not merely an internal emotion, it is a social performance. Drawing from Emile Durkheim's concept of collective emotion, shared feelings, especially those of moral indignation, serve to reinforce group cohesion. In digital environments, expressing outrage becomes a form of identity signaling. It communicates moral alignment, reinforces group belonging, and distinguishes us from them. Thus, rage bait does not simply provoke anger, it mobilizes collective emotional communities. The cognitive dimension can be understood through Daniel Kahneman's distinction between System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1, which is fast, intuitive, and emotional, and System 2, slow, analytical, and deliberative. Rage bait operates almost entirely with System 1, that is, immediate reactions, minimal cognitive efforts, and high emotional payoff. Nuanced or intellectual content, by contrast, requires System 2 engagement, which is cognitively demanding and therefore less attractive. In fast paced digital environments, digital platforms operate on engagement based algorithm, prioritizes content with high interaction rates, treat all engagement positive or negative as valuable. This creates a self-enforcing feedback loop: outrage, engagement, amplification, and more outrage. Rage bait thrives within this loop as it consistently generates high levels of interaction. At a deeper structural level, rage bait is embedded within what scholars describe as platform capitalism, as articulated in the age of surveillance capitalism. Digital platforms extract behavioral data and monetize user engagement. In this model, human attention and emotional responses become raw materials for economic value. Rage bait functions as a high efficiency extraction tool, maximizing dwell time, interaction intensity, and data generation. Classical rhetorics, as theorized by Aristotle, balanced three modes of persuasion: logos, that is reason; ethos, that is credibility; and pathos, that is emotion. In contemporary digital ecosystem, this balance has collapsed. Persuasion is increasingly dominated by pathos. Moral suasion, which traditionally sought to appeal to the conscience and ethical reflection, is often reduced to performative outrage. Ethos itself become contingent to visibility, while logos is marginalized by the demands of speed and engagement. Despite this epistemic value, nuanced content consistently underperforms. Several factors explain this. Why people exactly choose bad content over good content, over nuanced content? Probably because nuanced argument requires sustained attention and analytical effort, and that is a cognitive load. Temporal misalignment: digital platforms reward immediacy, whereas nuance requires times. There is low emotional arousal. It does not trigger strong emotional reactions. And of course, it is a disadvantage to the algorithmic economy that we are in. Lower engagement leads to reduced visibility. While outrage is rewarded with validation, nuance often goes unnoticed. The proliferation of rage bait has far reaching consequences. The first one being epistemic crisis. The capacity to distinguish truth from falsehood erodes as emotional intensity replaces evidentiary rigor. User becomes habituated to cycles of outrage, leading to heightened reactivity and reduced emotional regulation. Different groups inhabit distinct truth ecosystems, reinforcing polarization and mutual incomprehension. Complex issues are reduced to binary oppositions, undermining deliberative engagement. But why does this exactly happen? So, for this, let me take the help of one of my favorite philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche. Rage bait can be understood as a manifestation of resentment, a reactive moral psychology, in which individuals derive satisfaction from condemning others. He distinguishes between master morality, that is self affirming and creative, with slave morality, which is reactive, judgmental, and negating. In digital environments, rage bait fosters a culture of slave morality. Individuals seek validation through outrage. Identity is constructed through opposition. and moral superiority is performed rather than embodied. Those lacking agency or self confidence often seek validation through group identity and inherited markers like nation, religion, culture, caste, class, etc. This leads to a paradox. The assertion of superiority marks a deeper dependence on external validation. Nietzsche would further interpret this as affective nihilism, the proliferation of moral judgment without substantive value, the erosion of meaning beneath repetitive outrage. Coming to Michael Foucault's perspective of affective governance, power does not merely represses, it produces subjects, behaviors, and norms. In digital systems, algorithms regulate visibility. Visibility shapes credibility, and credibility shapes discourses. Building collective environments amplify emotional responses and diminishes individual rationality. Media theorists such as Marshall McLuhan reminds us the medium itself shapes the message. Digital platforms are structurally predisposed towards speed, repetition, emotional intensity. The digital ecosystem operates on logic of attention economy, a wealth of information that creates a poverty of attention. In such a system, attention becomes scarce, content competes for visibility, emotional intensity becomes a competitive advantage, and a common observation encapsulates this logic. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Several major works illuminate this dynamic. One, being amusing ourselves to death, the transformation of discourse into entertainment. An ongoing research focuses on algorithmic amplification and bias, mental health effects such as digital addiction, anxiety disorders, political polarization and ideological rigidity, information disorder such as misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. The rise of rage bait poses a fundamental challenge to the ideal of public sphere articulated by Habermas. For him, a healthy society depends on rational critical debate. Yes, in the current digital environment, discourse is reactive rather than reflective. Emotion displaces reason, outrage replaces deliberation. The result is not merely polarization, but a deeper erosion of the conditions necessary for democratic communication. We inhabit in an age where our attention is constantly solicited, our emotions continuously provoked, and our judgments subtly shaped. The content we consume does not merely inform us, it forms us. If there is one lesson to draw, it is that when you are not paying for the product, remember you are the product. And when you consume outrage uncritically, you become a conduit for its circulation. In the end, the question is not simply what we watch, read, or share. It is what these choices are making us. To consume responsibly, then, is not merely a personal preference, it is an ethical act. An act that will remind us that beauty of humanity is in oneness.